You're listening to an episode recorded during the time Innovation Fuel was part of University Canada West. We are proud and grateful for the work we've done together, and we want to thank the university for being in our podcast. We are now excited to continue the journey of Innovation Fuel into its next chapter. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Innovation Fuel, a business podcast by University Canada West.
Bringing you fantastic stories from accomplished entrepreneurs and key industry professionals. Let's explore the entrepreneurial world through local businesses and our university community.
I'm dealing with a lot of stress, anxiety, and many things, but that's part of our job. Sometimes our job's getting very, very stressful.
We're having a little fun, we're joking about it, but mental health is a big issue and a big thing and especially, going through this COVID element has caused a lot of stress and anxiety for a lot of people. But I think the way that we deal with it is sometimes we victimize these individuals when we shouldn't be victimizing them, and creating some more of a different environment to help support them in the challenges they're facing.
And also we should not feel we are victim of the situation. It's these bad things happens. It's the work getting very stressful sometimes. Your boss is getting sick or not getting responded to you, and you have to finish your task, and you should make some decisions. You should take more responsibility. You will grow up. You will become parents, and all of them are stressful during COVID or not during the COVID. Everything can be very stressful. For example, I'm from Middle East, and I was in the middle of the war. So yeah, I didn't choose that when I was a kid. It happened to me. Should I be victim? No. I've learned a lot. I learned to survive. I learned to be happy again. So that is happening to your life as well. So you need to move on, to learn and put it on path.
We'll learn to adapt to that, a new way of how do we act, how do we behave, how do we learn, can we adapt to the situation still to meet the needs that we need to make and the commitments we've set forth?
Yeah, exactly. Just look at immigrants as well. So they said that immigrants, you lost your life in the fire, because you need to build it from ground again. Even maybe you're in your 40s, but you need to start over again and over. And it's not easy. It's not easy for many of us, and we didn't actually sometimes choose to do it. So it's happened, or we're forced to do it. So it means how we can adapt ourselves, how we can relearn how to live again, and I think that we have some expert can help us. Stephane is here and help us to understand the mental health and how to deal with the difficult and not be victim of the time. Let's welcome Stephane.
Yes, Stephane, we are so excited to have you on our Innovation Fuel podcast, brought to us today by University Canada West. Stephane, before we get into this journey, we have so many questions to ask. Tell us a little bit about your journey, my friend.
I grew up as a happy boy in Montreal, joined the military at a very young age, at around 18 years old, spent 30 years in the military, and my whole adult life, I was a boss, right? I was a small boss, and then I became a bigger boss. But through my career, through my journey, after the end of the Cold War, I ended up being deployed a whole lot overseas. And during these deployments, one in particular in Rwanda, and many of your audience may know in the history books what happened in Rwanda, the tragic events of 1994, that is where perhaps the beginning of the rest of my life began. Because I came back from Rwanda a very, very different person than had left 10 months before, had a very, very difficult trajectory there. But my trajectory brought me to recognizing that the mental health system, as well-intentioned as it is, having great professionals with great skills and talents and education, I realized that that wasn't enough for human beings like myself to recover. And I started questioning really, what else can we as a system, as a society can do, and realize that we don't actually recover in our doctor's offices. We recover out there in society amongst our peers and our families and such. So I became very, very interested in that and started perhaps another career. And so I developed peer support network for the Canadian military. That lasted 10 years and did all sorts of work there. I was seconded to the Mental Health Commission of Canada, where I realized that the rest of Canada also needed to rehumanize itself when it comes to mental health. So I left the military, started a company, and we are now 30 people in my little ecosystem trying to change the world, one ecosystem after the next, and try to help organizations rehumanize themselves.
Can you walk us through the process, what you do at the earliest stage when the client approaches you?
We do all sorts of things at Mental Health Innovation. So we do the traditional consulting, regarding psychological health and safety in organizations. We deliver workshops. We help managers better understand how they can support their employees. I do keynote speeches to get people to understand. But my big thing is to, shift the paradigms. Let people know that there's an alternative way of understanding mental ill health than the traditional. Not that the traditional way of understanding mental health is bad, but I always say the way the brain functions, the serotonin in the brain, the amygdala in the brain, these are all things that are very, very important if you're a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist. Cognitive behavioral therapy, medication, the difference between depression and bipolar, those are all very important things if you're a doctor, treating clinician. But what I understand is that those things are not that important when you are a colleague, a friend, a family member, somebody who wants to support somebody who doesn't know how. So what we focus a lot of our attention in our flagship service actually is to create a grassroots movement in each of our organizations. And I say organizations because it doesn't have to be a company. Any ecosystem, could be a university, could be an association, a union, that brings people together under a common umbrella. That's the ecosystem that we work within. And we create very solid, accountable, very meaningful peer support programs where people who have been through problems, who have recovered, who are maintaining a healthy level of recovery, and who have the skills are brought in, and they are trained to actually support others so that these other people who are going through difficulties have more than a good clinician to go to, have more than perhaps a bit of medication to help them cope with these issues, but they have people to help them through that recovery journey, which normally is a very lonely journey. It's all about creating hope and all about rehumanizing the healing journey.
I'm an organization, come to you and ask you that we want to improve our mental health inside the workplace. So rather than workshop, what you do as a consultant?
One of the things I often say is mental health in the organization can be impacted within 15 feet of the human being. So you may have an organization with a president or a CEO or a leader that is extremely supportive, but unless all of the stratas in the organization, either in an up-down way or a left to right, everybody needs to understand the basic founding principles of how we as human beings can support each other. So the culture of the organization is extremely important to understand. When you say other than workshops, well, ultimately, when you gather a bunch of people and you try to give them a new way of thinking, a new process to apply, we have to deliver these through workshops or through training sessions, or even we have an e-learning campaign that achieves some of this. So some e-learning. So depending on the client, some clients don't want to pull people into a classroom. So in that case, we will suggest our e-learning campaign, which is called We Care. And in that campaign, you can actually learn, this is how you identify that somebody's not well. This is how I, as a human being, can be a little compassionate and stay connected and refer in an adroit way, in the proper way, to maybe you should consult a clinician, right? Because there's a good and a bad way of referring somebody. It's very delicate to say to somebody, ultimately, you need to see a shrink, because it can be taken very negatively by the person. There's a way to do that, right? So it's not the what. We all know the what, but how? How do you do that in a way that is not perceived as, oh my God? It will translate into a workshop or a learning event or something like that, because that's how you actually empower people. But it's always focused on those things that we feel at MHI are never the focal point. Our competition is actually things such as, we'll teach you mental health first aid. And mental health first aid is not a bad thing at all. what that teaches is essentially, here are the signs and symptoms of the various illnesses in the mental health spectrum. And we at MHI, not that that doesn't matter. Our belief is it doesn't matter if you're not a doctor. So what I've learned over the last 20 years is if Dave, as an example, is struggling, it matters to a clinician, and it matters from a prescription perspective what Dave consumes as therapies and psychotropic drugs, perhaps, to help him. But as a layperson, I don't need to know if Dave has bipolar or he's depressed or he has PTSD. Me as a layperson don't need all that clinical language, right? So what we've done is we've demedicalized all this, and we believe we made this very palatable, where people at the end of our workshops or keynotes or whatnot, they go, oh, I didn't know that I could actually do these simple things, and I support somebody, right?
Stephane, maybe I'm off basis here, but you're bringing in these processes into these organizations, and maybe you're overwrapping it in their culture, but it becomes a preventative element, meaning that we're building these infrastructure, these organizations around mental wellness. And so we can start preventing some of these things, but also maybe, and I think you led towards it a little bit, and maybe we need to discuss a little bit more about the next evolution of going to the psychotherapist or the next level. But maybe there's an awareness piece in here of noticing the signs towards those pieces.
You're very right that when culture, an organization starts noticing these things earlier in the process, it is actually primary prevention, because now you have an entire workplace of people, not just a couple of doctors who can treat people, but you have an entire workplace who fundamentally, generally understand that, hey, Dave's not doing too well. I need to go for a coffee with this guy. And you teach human beings that what they naturally do inside their families is something they can actually bring into the workplace. Because often people transform themselves between their house and the workplace, and they put the workplace facade on. Some people are bullies everywhere. I get it, right? But a lot of human beings are very nice people, and they support their families, and they know how to talk to people inside their family, and they think they don't have permission to actually do that in the workplace. Why not? And by the way, if you put people first, productivity will change. If you put productivity first, people will not do too well. So it's amazing how when you pivot that management approach, that culture, so ever slightly, it starts changing lives. The managers now don't feel morally conflicted anymore, because they're allowed to be human in the workplace. They're allowed to say, Dave, let's go for a walk. And knowing that their director will not say, what were you doing taking a walk at 10 a.m.? Well, I was taking a walk to support an employee. That is part of my job as a manager. Now, we can't do that all day, but there's a balance, because right now we're not doing it at all. We're just focused on productivity, emails, meetings, phone calls, and teleconferences. Well, having a chit chat is the art that we have forgotten. Now, how do you do that and remain productive? That's the key.
I think Stephane's tapping into too, something that we've always sort of tried to uncover on the other side of this element is EI, emotional intelligence, and that level of element of that structure piece of, because if you have a boss, do you feel comfortable going to that boss? Is that a challenge? Can you have that walk with that boss? And I think that's what we start to see if we had this integration of this humanization, as you said, into the workplace, would make it more comfortable for people to share ideas.
It's interesting because I'm a man. I was raised in the 60s and 70s, so I come from that era. Then I spent 30 years in the military, and it's a rough and tough environment and all this. But I got to tell you, we've forgotten as a species, probably, I'm picking on men here, Dave, I apologize, but men, I think, are worse off because we think that if we show any kind of vulnerability, that is a weakness. And I got to tell you that my entire career, I don't know why, but my entire career, I never really cared about being wrong. Today, I catch myself at least once a week telling my people in my company when I'm about to make a decision, I'm happy to be wrong here, but here's my opinion. What do you guys think? Bosses need to ensure they start thinking a slightly different way, that they start thinking that my role is to achieve success. If I surround myself with people that I've selected to work on this, then I have to tap in, educate my decision-making process. It is not an easy road to travel, because when we get a new person in our little ecosystem, which is not a perfect company, by the way, we're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we are very open-minded. I think we have a fairly high level of emotional intelligence. It takes some people in the company years to understand that they can actually argue with me because they come from another workplace where you don't do that. You don't disagree with the boss. And one employee, outstanding employee that works with MHI, which will remain nameless today, but she knows exactly what I'm talking about. It took her a couple of years, and she says it. I now feel comfortable to disagree, although I always gave her permission. There's a huge transformation that occurs, and we are better for it. I love it when this human being says, I don't quite agree with you. Thank you. Let's talk about it. I don't want to make mistakes. I'm vulnerable to making mistakes the same way anybody is. And to me, it's very important that I always have the final say. I don't have to be insecure about that. And lowering the power differentials and actually flattening them, because I always have the final decision. So why do I need to exercise my power? I never have to, right? So all these little things are so important. But we've done a bit of a deep dive in that element, but there are so many other elements that are also important when it comes to mental ill health and creating a culture. And by the way, I'm not saying our culture is perfect. It is always a struggle because at any given time, there's no universal solution to maintaining a perfect culture in the organization because at any given time, one of your people will be struggling and going through a new life challenge. And we need to pivot constantly. The pandemic has introduced to organizations the word pivot. Well, you should know that you pivot all the time. And if you don't pivot all the time, you should start. You should always be prepared to change, alter, listen, and pivot in how your ecosystem is functioning because culture is not static.
Let's talk about pivot because we've talked a lot of things about how, Stephane, your organization supports this element. But now let's fast forward. You have some individuals in your community that are suffering from mental health. How do you work with those situations? How should we be supportive of these environments and individuals within that space?
Well, one thing I would say is we can speak about two different aspects of this. At the individual level, there are things an individual can do tomorrow morning to support a colleague. And then there's organizationally what needs to happen. So if I deconstruct the question a bit, let's start with organizations. Organizations can't event themselves into a solution. They can't briefing note themselves into a solution. They can't poster themselves in a solution. Let me tell you why I'm saying this. Organizations make the mistake of thinking, we'll create a committee, we'll create a set of values, we'll create a poster, we'll put this in the elevator lobbies, and our culture will change. Or we'll create an event, we'll invite a keynote speaker, we'll have a few workshops, and then that will resolve our problem. Organizations need to work hard at this. Those who are looking for the easy button are going to continue to struggle with this. So number one. Number two, we always tell our clients, it's okay to focus on managers and helping managers and directors and all this. But if you're going to change the paradigm, to some degree, the rules of the mental health support game in the company, you can't just tell the managers. You got to tell everybody. It's like you're playing a game. And if you're going to change the rules, you got to tell everybody around the card table what the new rules are. If you just tell half the players, it's not going to work anymore. The game we are in, I'm not making light of the mental health situation in organizations, but the game we are in, if you're going to start telling managers, approach your people, go for walks, rehumanize yourself, ask them how they're doing, ask them about their kids and all that. Well, if you've never done that before and you don't tell the employees that this is the culture we're striving towards, what do you think the employees are going to do? They're going to freak out the first time the boss goes, oh, you want to go for a coffee? You got to shape the entire workplace, right? Now that's at the organizational level, which is why we normally try to implement workplace-wide initiatives. Even then, it's very difficult. Right now, we are being asked time and time again to do work with the management team. So we start with managers in the hopes that they're going to also empower their employees to see the new reality, but that we don't control, right? But we certainly believe that you need to tell everybody how we expect everybody to behave in this new cultural environment where people are supportive and accept the support. And of course, from a manager's point of view, you can't say, well, I'm going to start being supportive on Monday and expect your employees to accept that support. It's going to be a while, right? And we have to expect that it's not going to work at first. And so all of this is at play in large organizations or large systems.
Do you think why it doesn't work? Why people don't accept you as a leader, don't accept that you can be supportive at the beginning?
There's a very important piece of literature. You could Google it if your people want to Google it. It's the Hoag study. It is a decade and a half old. The Hoag study was instrumental in the sense that it was asking people inside a workplace, if you wish, if they trusted their workplace to support them if they ever developed a mental health problem, if they felt it would harm their career, if they would develop a mental, and questions like that of perceptions, right? But the Hoag study was instrumental, especially for those who want to look at the evidence, because it had embedded scales to create two cohorts of respondents. One cohort of respondent that likely had a mental health problem at the time they answered the survey, and a cohort of people who were healthy. And the perceptions are drastically different. So I'm going to sum up the study this way. If you ask a healthy Stephane tomorrow morning, and I'm healthy, Stephane, if ever you develop a mental health challenge in their workplace, do you trust your boss? Do you think your organization would support you? Do you think it would harm your career? My answers will be very different than if you ask me when I am healthy. Why? Because when I'm unwell, figure it out, man. It's really easy to figure out. The very part of my human anatomy that perceives the world around me is unwell. We're going to perceive that it's going to be harmful for my career. I'm not being paranoid, but I kind of am, right? I'm going to perceive that when my boss says, "How are you, Stephane?" I'm going to say, "Why? Is something wrong?" Right? Because there is something wrong and I don't want him to find out. So the why is answerable now because we have evidence that the perception of human beings changed drastically, and it doubles. Like the respondent levels double. So if 20% of people say, "I wouldn't trust my workplace," it's 40% for those who are not well. Doubles pretty much in all the areas of question. That is the why. And that is very important to understand, especially for managers or even colleagues. So if Dave is unwell and I approach Dave to support him, whether I'm a boss or not, I have to remember the Hoag study. When I ask him, "Hey, Dave, how you doing, man? I haven't seen you in a while. You seem, he might react negatively to that. I should not take offense to that. If I'm in a good place and I've decided to support Dave, I need to remember that. So if Dave has a negative reaction towards me, I got to park the ego. I can't start getting upset and say, "Oh, if you don't want support, then that's your problem." And no, I have to be prepared for that. And I have to have an answer for that. And my answer has always been very simple. "Hey, Dave, man, I just care about you, buddy. If you want to chat, let me know, man. And it's okay. I respect you, right? Back off. Wait a week. Try again, right?" And that's what We Care teaches. That's what the e-learning teaches, in a sense. That's what our workshops teach. It gives people insight on how to react to the normal reaction of somebody who's unwell. Because often that's what the number one question we're asked by managers is, "I don't know what's wrong, but Dave, my employee, was a good worker. He goes on sick leave because of burnout or he's depressed. I give him a call, a week after he's on sick leave, and he hung up the phone on me. He was all angry that I called him. He thought I was bullying him back to work." You didn't listen. The Hoag study. That's why he hung up the phone line, right? So there's all these insights that are creating a minefield. And when humans are interacting with each other, they step on mines all the time. And then they give up and the culture goes back to what it was before.
We as managers tend to want to go in and problem solve right away. And we're trained to do that. So like if someone's having a challenge, hey, we still have the best intentions for this individual. We're trying to figure out how do we help them? How do we support them? What I hear from you is like, back away, give it some space for a bit, and then come back to it later on. Let them maybe possibly come back to you or reapproach it again.
And really, the two words to remember for your audience here who's listening is empower the person to make their own decisions. Don't problem solve. When a person starts decompensating and starts being unwell mentally, there is a tendency to become a victim. There is a tendency for people to say, it's the organization's fault. There's a tendency to abdicate one's own response. And it's part of the illness, by the way. I'm not making an excuse for it, but part of recovery is the ability for a human being to say, wait a minute here. I cannot blame all my behaviors on my mental health challenge. I was a jerk that day, and that was wrong. I said things I should not have said. I must muster the courage to apologize for that. I must take responsibility for my actions, not my symptoms. My illness is causing my symptoms. But unless I am completely mentally incompetent, I must strive to continue to make appropriate choices Now, it's a lot harder when you're struggling. I get that. But we can't just let the free-for-all of everybody who has a mental health challenge now, they can do anything they want. There has to be a semblance of rules, and the organization is responsible to create the conditions for social support to occur and the support to be there, but also create the social construct that people, when they are reminded, well, hold on here, Dave, I understand that you're not well, but I can't accept that you go around the floor yelling at people. But I will support you through this. So I understand, but I will not accept. We need to be able to have two sides of the conversation. But you, as the receiving end of this from either a colleague or a manager, have to be able to rationally say, it's true. I hear that I am understood, but I also hear that me yelling at my colleagues is unacceptable. I will correct this behavior.
So it's victimizing it, and we shouldn't victimize it.
Well, at the same time, I got to tell you, when I was in my worst days, I had all the rights in the world to think I'm a victim. And I was. I came back from Rwanda. I was a mess. I was a certain type of human being. 10.5 months later, I come back. It's very difficult to draw the line where, is this behavior caused by the symptom, or is it just because I'm being a jerk that day?
I have a scenario that exactly happened yesterday. My daughter is sick at home, and I had to work. I had interviews to attend, and she was keep calling me because she was sick. And it was a lot of stress on me. My husband was at work. I was alone with her all the day. And I have to send an email to everyone. I made a mistake yesterday. I sent an announcement for an event that was for months ago. I made a mistake because I was so stressed out. I was juggling between her attention that she wanted me to do. She had a fever, right? And then my work. Can I say that I was a victim to my situation?
Personally, I haven't studied this field a great deal, but you're asking me personally as a leader, as a human being. So my opinion is this. There are varying degrees of challenges that we as human beings face. I mean, life is pleasant, life is fun, life is full of joy, but life is hard at times. And what you're describing to me is not a victim scenario. It's more of a life is hard, and you experience a hard moment in the spectrum of life, right? But living through hard times does not necessarily make the person who's living through those hard times a victim, because a victim supposes there's an aggressor. To me, anyways, my definition of victim is that somebody is being aggressed, or somebody is causing this, or something has caused this thing. And the person who is the victim, the word to me carries a lot of negative connotation, because it really puts the person in a position, a psychological state of mind where they are hopeless. I am powerless because I'm a victim. Now, these are the various ways we interpret words, right? Bottom line is this. We as a society are in a fast food sort of environment constantly. I'm not talking about McDonald's here. We want easy buttons. We want to use quick words. It's the era of social media. How many characters in a tweet? And we have reduced the spectrum of understanding that different words exist because there are different situations. And I'll give you the best example. The best example of this is we work with law enforcement organizations quite a bit, right? In law enforcement organization, it's a bit like the military used to be many years ago, where we did not understand the spectrum. We only saw things in two different colors, where you're either healthy or you're traumatized. There's nothing in between. And the traumatized is the equivalent of the victim, right? You can be a police officer and have a terrible thing happen on a given day, but that ain't trauma. That was a hard day. It was upsetting. We can be upset. We can be discouraged. We can be scared without being traumatized. But it's as if we now have boiled down all of these situations and words and meanings into one word. And even, in workplaces, we speak to some people sometimes who their boss was telling them something, and they said, my boss traumatized me. What do you mean he traumatized you? She gave you an earlier deadline. Stress does not equal trauma, right? So in this world of ours, trying to rapidly understand things, we sometimes make the mistake of over-condensing things, and then everything becomes the same. when we know not everything is the same, right? So it's a long sort of diatribe here, but to me, I think the choice of words is important. And I would say you had a shitty day. You had a bad day. You had a bad week.
Stephane, to end the show, we want to send out a challenge. Can you give us a challenge that we can throw out to their audience, to our students out there?
Okay, the challenge is this. Next time you're walking on campus, next time you end a Zoom meeting, next time you're interacting with another human being and your gut, not your brain, your gut tells you, Dave's not himself, or what's going on, right? Don't walk away. Lean forward. Expose yourself to risk. Do something that might be uncomfortable and ask Dave. Call him up. Say, hey, Dave, just checking up on you, man. You doing okay? And if you want to practice this to be uncomfortable, get used to being uncomfortable. Next time you walk in an elevator, open a conversation with a perfect stranger on the elevator. Challenge yourself. Get out of your bubble. Take the bubble wrap off. Test it in an elevator. Your ability to connect with somebody and have a very quick conversation, knowing that in 10 seconds, the elevator door opens. That's safe, right? Push yourself outside your comfort zone and prepare yourself to actually call somebody and offer them care, offer them support, right? That's the challenge. There's a lot of hows, but get out of your comfort zone. Lean forward, lean out, right?
Love it.
Thank you, everyone. That was another episode of Innovation Fuel. Thank you for listening to Innovation Fuel. We are on all podcast streaming platforms, Google, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Visit our website at www.ucanwest.ca/Innovation Fuel. Also, follow us on Instagram at Innovation_Fuel.